The massive transport shuttle Retribution shuddered as its docking clamps engaged with Station Kepler 442b, the galaxy's most infamous maximum security prison facility. Through the reinforced viewport, Commander Marcus Kane watched the colossal structure rotate slowly against the starfield backdrop. The station was a nightmare of black metal and glowing force fields, designed to contain the most dangerous criminals from across 37 star systems. Marcus sat motionless in his reinforced restraints, the neural dampening collar around his neck humming with subtle energy designed to suppress violent tendencies in most species. His weathered face remained impassive, steel-gray eyes observing everything with the practiced calm of a career soldier. The charges against him were fabricated, destroying a consortium supply depot, killing 17 security personnel, terrorism against the Galactic Trade Union, but protesting his innocence now would serve no purpose. The transport bay housed 43 prisoners from 22 different species, each contained in specialized restraint systems designed for their particular biology. To his left, a massive Brutalian warrior strained against graviton shackles that kept his 4 arms immobilized, his tusked face twisted in perpetual rage. On his right, a Xerian assassin hung suspended in a stasis field, its segmented body completely motionless except for the occasional twitch of its compound eyes. None of them spoke to him. They didn't need to. Marcus could sense their instinctive wariness, the way their various alien sensory organs catalogued him as something dangerous despite his relatively small size. Pheromone detectors, electromagnetic sensors, psychic emanations, all of them registered the same conclusion. This human was different. A Zephyrian guard approached, its crystalline exoskeleton clicking and scraping with each careful step. The insectoid alien's compound eyes reflected the transport's harsh lighting as it consulted a holographic manifest floating before its face. When it spoke, the universal translator rendered its chittering into flat, emotionless words. Human designation, Kane, Marcus. Serial number 7749 Delta Prime. You are hereby remanded to cell block Omega 7 for a period of 10 standard galactic cycles, pending appeal or execution of sentence. Marcus nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that carried no submission. The Zephyrian's crystalline plates rattled softly, a sound he recognized as nervousness. Even the guards were afraid of him, and they carried plasma weapons capable of reducing him to constituent atoms. The processing began immediately. Biometric scans, psychological evaluations, threat assessments. Marcus submitted to it all with mechanical compliance while his enhanced senses mapped the prison's layout. The artificial gravity was set to 0.8 standard, lighter than his homeworld but heavier than most civilized planets. The atmospheric composition favored oxygen-breathing species, though individual cell blocks could be customized. The structural materials were reinforced uranium, designed to withstand the destructive capabilities of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. As they moved through the prison's maze-like corridors, Marcus catalogued guard positions, surveillance systems, and potential weak points. 30 years of military service had ingrained certain habits too deeply to abandon, even here. The Zephyrian escort noticed his analytical gaze and shuddered, its exoskeleton producing a sound like breaking glass. Your reputation precedes you, Deathworlder, the guard whispered, its translator barely audible. The consortium has issued special handling protocols for your species. Try not to live up to them. Marcus allowed himself the ghost of a smile. If they only knew the truth about where he'd really come from, their protocols would be significantly more stringent. The massive blast doors to cell block Omega 7 began their slow opening sequence, revealing the prison's internal structure. Marcus Kane, former military commander, falsely accused terrorist, and native of one of the galaxy's most lethal worlds, stepped forward into his new home. His real education was about to begin. Cell block Omega 7 was an architectural marvel of controlled chaos, a vast cylindrical chamber that stretched upward for nearly a kilometer into the station's superstructure. The walls were honeycombed with thousands of individual cells arranged in concentric rings, each level connected by a network of anti-gravity platforms that hummed with electromagnetic energy. The constant movement of guards, maintenance drones, and automated supply pods created a hypnotic dance of lights against the dark metal surfaces. Marcus was escorted to level 47, designated for Category C dangerous inmates, a classification that would have been laughable if the administrators knew his true origins. The elevator platform rose smoothly through the prison's levels, each floor revealing glimpses of the diverse alien population contained within. Gaseous beings floated in specialized atmospheric chambers, crystalline entities pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and various predatory species prowled their confines like caged beasts. His assigned cell was a 3-meter cube of reinforced uranium, spartanly furnished with the bare necessities of survival. A force field generator hummed in the doorframe, its blue energy barrier capable of withstanding the full charge of a Thuralian rage beast. The sleeping platform automatically adjusted its dimensions and firmness upon detecting his human biosignature, while a nutrition dispenser began cycling through its database of Terran-compatible sustenance. The environmental systems worked overtime to maintain atmospheric balance across the block's diverse population. Marcus could hear the constant whisper of air recyclers and the subtle hum of gravity generators maintaining structural integrity under the strain of housing creatures from dozens of different worlds. The lighting followed a standard galactic day cycle, though individual cells could be customized for species-specific needs. To his immediate left, separated by a transparent aluminum barrier, lay the domain of a creature that defied easy classification. Creek the Vorthan existed in a methane-rich atmosphere that would have been instantly lethal to most carbon-based life forms. Its tentacled body writhed constantly in slow, hypnotic patterns, occasionally pressing against its containment to observe the new arrival. Bioluminescent patches along its limbs pulsed in what Marcus recognized as a primitive form of communication. Prison ecosystems operated on evolutionary principles as rigid as any natural habitat, and Station Kepler, 442b had evolved into a complex predator-prey hierarchy over its 3 decades of operation. At the apex sat the Korathi Syndicate, their reptilian members commanding respect through a combination of natural aggression, superior organization, and strategic brutality that had crushed 17 previous attempts at revolution. The Korathi controlled the prison's black market economy with ruthless efficiency. Contraband flowed through their networks like lifeblood, synthetic narcotics that could affect multiple species, communication devices capable of reaching beyond the prison's jamming fields, weapons crafted from recycled materials, and most precious of all, information. They maintained detailed files on every inmate, guard, and administrator, trading secrets like currency in the prison's shadow economy. Beneath the Korathi operated a complex web of subsidiary gangs organized along species lines, each controlling specific aspects of prison life. The Thuralian collective dominated the gambling operations, their four-armed physiology perfect for managing multiple betting pools simultaneously. The Xerian Brotherhood ran protection rackets with surgical precision, their natural stealth capabilities making them ideal enforcers. The Nexus Syndicate, composed of various cybernetically enhanced species, controlled access to the prison's limited recreational facilities. Lower in the hierarchy were the specialty groups, the traders, who facilitated exchanges between different species, the information brokers, who sold intelligence about guard rotations and administrative decisions, and the spiritual guides, who provided comfort to inmates facing execution or life sentences. Each group served a function in the prison's underground economy, creating a delicate balance of mutual dependence and controlled hostility. At the bottom of this social pyramid existed the lone operators, the physically weak species, and those whose biology made them unsuitable for gang membership. The peaceful Lumina, with their photosynthetic lifestyle and pacifist philosophy, huddled together in small groups for protection. The fragile Zephyrians formed defensive clusters, their crystalline exoskeletons no match for the predatory instincts of the higher-tier inmates. The elderly, the injured, and the mentally unstable survived on scraps and charity. Marcus observed this ecosystem with the analytical mind of someone who had spent decades studying predator-prey relationships on worlds where such knowledge meant the difference between life and death. He identified the key power brokers, mapped the informal territories, and catalogued the unspoken rules that prevented total chaos. The guards maintained order through superior firepower and the prison's automated defense systems, but they were vastly outnumbered and relied heavily on the inmate hierarchy to police itself. Prison ecosystems operated on evolutionary principles as rigid as any natural habitat, and Station Kepler 442b had evolved into a complex predator-prey hierarchy over its 3 decades of operation. At the apex sat the Korathi Syndicate, their reptilian members commanding respect through a combination of natural aggression, superior organization, and strategic brutality that had crushed 17 previous attempts at revolution. The Korathi controlled the prison's black market economy with ruthless efficiency. Contraband flowed through their networks like lifeblood, synthetic narcotics that could affect multiple species, communication devices capable of reaching beyond the prison's jamming fields, weapons crafted from recycled materials, and most precious of all, information. They maintained detailed files on every inmate, guard, and administrator, trading secrets like currency in the prison's shadow economy. Beneath the Korathi operated a complex web of subsidiary gangs organized along species lines, each controlling specific aspects of prison life. The Thuralian collective dominated the gambling operations, their four-armed physiology perfect for managing multiple betting pools simultaneously. The Xerian Brotherhood ran protection rackets with surgical precision, their natural stealth capabilities making them ideal enforcers. The Nexus Syndicate, composed of various cybernetically enhanced species, controlled access to the prison's limited recreational facilities. Lower in the hierarchy were the specialty groups, the traders, who facilitated exchanges between different species, the information brokers, who sold intelligence about guard rotations and administrative decisions, and the spiritual guides, who provided comfort to inmates facing execution or life sentences. Each group served a function in the prison's underground economy, creating a delicate balance of mutual dependence and controlled hostility. At the bottom of this social pyramid existed the lone operators, the physically weak species, and those whose biology made them unsuitable for gang membership. The peaceful Lumina, with their photosynthetic lifestyle and pacifist philosophy, huddled together in small groups for protection. The fragile Zephyrians formed defensive clusters, their crystalline exoskeletons no match for the predatory instincts of the higher-tier inmates. The elderly, the injured, and the mentally unstable survived on scraps and charity. Marcus observed this ecosystem with the analytical mind of someone who had spent decades studying predator-prey relationships on worlds where such knowledge meant the difference between life and death. He identified the key power brokers, mapped the informal territories, and catalogued the unspoken rules that prevented total chaos. The guards maintained order through superior firepower and the prison's automated defense systems, but they were vastly outnumbered and relied heavily on the inmate hierarchy to police itself. The balance was maintained through a complex system of tribute, protection, and mutual assured destruction. The Korathi allowed the smaller gangs to operate because eliminating them would require resources better spent elsewhere. The smaller gangs paid their tribute and followed the rules because rebellion meant extinction. The lone operators survived by providing services or staying invisible. It was a system that had evolved over years of trial and error, written in blood and enforced through fear. Into this delicate ecosystem, Marcus Kane represented an unknown variable, a lone human with no apparent allies, no known affiliations, and no clear position in the established order. On his third day, the system moved to classify him. Thax the Enforcer approached during the daily recreation period, his massive frame casting shadows across the corridor. At 7 feet tall, the Korathi's scarred hide bore the ritual markings of a veteran from the Outer Rim conflicts, and his amber eyes held the cold intelligence of an apex predator. Behind him, a carefully selected entourage of Korathi warriors and allied species flanked him in a deliberate show of overwhelming force. "Little pink mammal," Thax hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air for chemical signals of fear or aggression, "you will contribute to our organization's continued prosperity. 20% of your nutrition allowance, and any communication privileges you may receive." Marcus sat cross-legged on his sleeping platform, his posture appearing completely relaxed despite the threat surrounding him. "That's a generous offer, but I'll have to respectfully decline." The translator's flat, emotionless delivery couldn't hide the shock that rippled through Thax's entourage like an electromagnetic pulse. The recreation area transformed from a bustling hub of activity into a theater of tension as word spread through the prison's communication networks with viral intensity. Inmates from dozens of species pressed against viewing barriers, their various sensory organs, compound eyes, electromagnetic sensors, pheromone detectors, psychic resonators, all focused on the unfolding drama with predatory interest. Even the automated surveillance drones adjusted their positions for optimal coverage, their AI systems flagging the confrontation as a potential security event. The Zephyrian guards stationed around the recreation area subtly shifted their positions, plasma weapons charging with barely audible whines. Their crystalline exoskeletons clicked nervously as they recognized the signs of an impending territorial dispute. In their 300-cycle experience managing the prison, challenges to the Korathi Syndicate were rare, brutal, and invariably ended with someone in the medical wing. Or the morgue. Thax reared to his full 7-foot height, his muscular frame casting an intimidating shadow across the immediate area. The ritual scars covering his hide began to glow with a faint bioluminescence, a Korathi threat display that had evolved over millions of years to paralyze prey through sheer visual intimidation. His neck crest flared wide, revealing the poisonous barbs hidden beneath his scales, while his tail swept the floor in aggressive arcs that had cleared lesser inmates from a 5-meter radius. "You pathetic little creature," Thax snarled, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble that resonated through the metal flooring. "Do you comprehend what you are refusing? Do you understand the consequences of defying the Korathi Syndicate?" The assembled inmates held their collective breath as Marcus rose slowly from his sleeping platform. At barely 6 feet tall and possessing what appeared to be the standard soft-tissue construction of most mammalian species, he seemed laughably outmatched against the reptilian giant. Yet something in his fluid movement patterns made several experienced predators instinctively step backward, their survival instincts triggered by signals their conscious minds couldn't identify. "I understand perfectly," Marcus replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent recreation area with disturbing clarity. "You're apex predators who've grown comfortable feeding on species that can't fight back. You've built your reputation on intimidation and overwhelming force against targets that never had a chance to resist." Thax's amber eyes blazed with fury, pupils contracting to vertical slits as his predatory programming engaged fully. "Impossible. You're from Terra, a garden world that breeds soft creatures adapted for comfort and ease. Your species couldn't survive a single rotation on a proper death world like Korathi Prime." The sound that escaped Marcus might have been laughter, but it held absolutely no humor, only the kind of cold amusement that apex predators reserved for prey that didn't yet realize it was already dead. Several inmates recognized that particular tone and began backing away from the immediate area, their own survival instincts overriding curiosity. "Terra isn't my homeworld, Thax," Marcus said, and something in his pronunciation of the Korathi's name made the reptilian's threat display falter momentarily. "I was born on Hades 7, in the Outer Veil. Tell me, have you ever heard of that particular rock?" The change in Thax's expression was immediate and visceral. Every predatory instinct that had kept him alive through decades of gang warfare suddenly screamed warnings that his higher brain functions struggled to process. Hades 7 wasn't just a death world. It was the Deathworld, a planet so hostile that the Galactic Survey Corps had classified it as uninhabitable by any known form of life. That can't be possible," Thax stammered, his voice losing its intimidating rumble. "Nothing lives on Hades 7. It's a restricted system. The atmospheric pressure alone would liquefy most organic compounds." Marcus stepped closer to his cell's force field barrier, and every predator in the recreation area felt their survival instincts trigger simultaneously. "Mining colony. Uranium extraction. My parents were part of the initial surveyor team when I was 5 standard years old." His gray eyes met Thax's amber ones directly, and the Korathi saw something there that challenged every assumption he'd ever made about the food chain. "I spent 15 years on that world before joining the Terran Defense Corps. Learned to hunt pyroclast dragons before I hit puberty, not for food, you understand, but because they were hunting me." Marcus paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "Would you like me to describe what they taste like?" Or perhaps explain why the mining operation needed to be abandoned after only 20 years. Within minutes of the confrontation's end, the prison's informal communication networks exploded into activity with an intensity that overwhelmed even the most sophisticated monitoring systems. The story of the humans' defiance spread through Station Kepler 442b like a quantum entanglement cascade, each retelling adding new layers of mythology to an already extraordinary event. In the Thuralian gambling dens, four-armed bookmakers frantically adjusted odds on everything from Marcus's survival probability to the timeline of his inevitable demise. The initial confrontation had been witnessed by representatives from 17 different species, each carrying the tale back to their respective communities with cultural interpretations that ranged from religious prophecy to evolutionary impossibility. The Xerian Brotherhood's encrypted communication channels buzzed with technical analysis. Their cybernetic enhancements allowed them to process biometric data that others had missed. The human's heart rate had remained constant throughout the encounter, his stress hormones showed no elevation, and most disturbing of all, his threat assessment algorithms had classified Thax as negligible risk throughout the entire exchange. In the lower levels where the Lumina gathered for their photosynthetic meditation cycles, the peaceful aliens whispered among themselves in harmonics that their translators struggled to interpret. They spoke of disruption in the natural order, of predator hierarchies being challenged by forces beyond their comprehension. Their collective consciousness, evolved over millennia of hive-mind cooperation, sensed something fundamental shifting in the prison's ecosystem. The Zephyrians clicked and chattered in frequencies that resonated through their crystalline structures, sharing fragmented recordings of the confrontation captured through their natural electromagnetic sensors. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed microscopic details that organic eyes had missed, the human's muscle tension patterns, the subtle shifts in his electromagnetic field, the way photons seemed to bend differently around him during moments of intense focus. But it was in cell block Omega 7 itself where the most significant changes occurred. Inmates who had previously ignored the human's existence now found excuses to pass by his cell during recreation periods. Some left small offerings, extra nutrition packets, crude tools fashioned from recycled materials, information about guard rotations written in chemical formulas that could be absorbed through skin contact. Creek, the Vorthan in the adjacent methane-filled chamber, had maintained constant observation since the confrontation ended. His tentacled form writhed with unprecedented agitation as he processed sensory data through organs that could detect quantum fluctuations in living tissue. When he finally spoke, his translator unit crackled with overcharged energy. Human Marcus, he gurgled, bioluminescent patches along his limbs pulsing in complex patterns, the stories spreading through this facility, they speak of Hades 7 as if it were mythology given flesh. Is the truth as terrible as the whispers suggest? Marcus continued his evening exercise routine, flowing through combat forms that looked deceptively like an ancient dance but were actually training sequences designed for fighting in crushing atmospheric pressure. Each movement was precise, economical, and lethally efficient. The stories probably don't do it justice, Creek. Hades 7 doesn't just try to kill you, it tries to kill you in ways that evolution never prepared any species to handle. He transitioned into a different sequence, one that emphasized explosive acceleration and strike patterns designed to penetrate natural armor. 3.2 Standard gravity. Atmospheric pressure that would turn most organic material into paste. Native predators that hunt in coordinated packs and can bite through battleship hull plating. The air itself is a cocktail of compounds that would dissolve most species' respiratory systems in minutes. Creek's form went completely still, a reaction that in Vorthan biology indicated either death or absolute terror. And you lived there. As a juvenile organism. For 15 years. Marcus's voice carried no pride, no boastfulness, just the flat certainty of someone stating an indisputable fact. My enhanced cardiovascular system, my reaction speed, my bone density, the composition of my blood, everything about my physiology was shaped by surviving in conditions that would kill most galactic species before they could even register the threat. The implications rippled through the prison's population like seismic waves. If this human had spent his formative years adapting to survive on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, what did that make him in the relatively benign environment of a space station? From the upper levels came the sounds of hushed emergency conferences as the Korathi Syndicate grappled with a threat assessment that challenged their understanding of biological possibility. Thax's authority hadn't just been questioned, it had been dismissed by something that represented an evolutionary pathway their species had never encountered. In the lower levels, smaller gangs and individual operators began making quiet calculations about shifting allegiances and survival strategies. A new apex predator had announced its presence, and the prison's established ecosystem was about to undergo a fundamental reorganization. The assault came with the calculated precision of a military operation, timed to coincide with the morning meal distribution when Cell Block Omega-7 security protocols shifted from nighttime lockdown to supervised movement. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush that represented months of planning and surveillance. 6 elite Korathi warriors converging from predetermined positions along the corridor network, their movements coordinated by subsonic pheromone signals that bypassed the prison's communication monitoring systems. Marcus detected the attack before the first warrior had taken 3 steps toward him. His enhanced sensory apparatus, evolved under the crushing atmospheric conditions of Hades 7, registered minute changes in air pressure, electromagnetic signatures, and chemical compositions that would have been imperceptible to most galactic species. The subtle shift in corridor acoustics, the barely detectable scent of Korathi combat pheromones, the microscopic vibrations transmitted through the station's superstructure, all combined to create a threat assessment that triggered his enhanced reflexes with devastating efficiency. The lead attacker, a scarred veteran whose ritual markings identified him as a former shock trooper from the Outer Rim campaigns, launched himself forward with claws extended and killing fury blazing in his amber eyes. His strategy was textbook predator behavior: pin the smaller opponent against the nearest hard surface, then use superior mass and natural weaponry to deliver a killing blow before backup could arrive. Instead, Marcus stepped aside with fluid grace that seemed to violate several laws of physics. His movement patterns adapted from 15 years of dodging creatures that moved faster than conscious thought. His enhanced reflexes, operating at speeds that made the Korathi's attack appear sluggish, allowed him to grab the warrior's extended arm and redirect his momentum with mechanical precision. The sound of chitinous scales impacting reinforced uranium echoed through the corridor with bone-jarring intensity. The second attacker, recognizing that direct assault had failed, attempted a leg sweep designed to shatter the human's obviously fragile bone structure. The Korathi's muscular tail whipped through the air with enough force to crack titanium, its trajectory calculated to connect with maximum kinetic energy transfer. Marcus simply leaped over the sweeping appendage with an ease that defied the prison's artificial gravity, then brought his knee down on the Korathi's exposed spine with surgical precision. The alien's exoskeleton cracked like breaking glass, producing a sound that made several watching inmates physically recoil in sympathetic pain. The remaining 4 warriors, their battle-tested tactical training screaming warnings about engaging an unknown threat type, nonetheless pressed their attack with the desperate fury of predators who understood that retreat meant death. They converged simultaneously from multiple angles, their natural weapons gleaming under the corridor's harsh lighting, confident that overwhelming numbers would compensate for whatever advantages their opponent possessed. They discovered why the Galactic Survey Corps had classified Hades 7 as unsurvivable by any known form of life. Marcus moved like liquid violence given physical form, his combat techniques drawn from a childhood spent surviving encounters with apex predators that could tear apart starship hulls. Every strike was precisely targeted at nerve clusters, joint articulations, and structural weak points that most species didn't realize they possessed. His enhanced bone density, developed under crushing atmospheric pressure, allowed him to deliver impacts that would have shattered his own skeleton under normal evolutionary conditions. The corridor filled with the sounds of combat. The crack of breaking exoskeletons, the wet impact of tissue trauma, and the increasingly desperate snarls of predators discovering they had become prey. Within 30 seconds, all 6 attackers lay motionless on the metal flooring, their bodies arranged in patterns that suggested systematic dismantlement rather than random violence. The corridor had fallen silent except for the labored breathing of wounded Korathi and the soft hum of environmental systems struggling to process the sudden spike in atmospheric adrenaline compounds. Other inmates pressed themselves against their cell barriers, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loudly as they processed what they had witnessed. Marcus straightened his prison uniform with the same casual precision he might use to adjust his appearance after a mild workout, stepping over the bodies with complete indifference. "Anyone else hungry?" he asked conversationally. The crowd parted before him like he carried a virulent plague, their various survival instincts unanimous in their assessment: apex predator in motion, do not engage. 3 days after the Corridor massacre, Station Kepler 442b's social ecosystem had undergone a complete evolutionary reversal that left xenobiologists across the galaxy scrambling to understand the implications. The Korathi Syndicate, their leadership either confined to the medical wing with spinal injuries or transferred to solitary confinement pending investigation, had effectively ceased to exist as a functional organization. Their vast criminal enterprise, built over decades through systematic intimidation and strategic violence, had collapsed overnight like a house of quantum cards. The power vacuum created by their fall triggered a cascade of territorial redistributions that rippled through every level of the prison's hierarchy. Smaller gangs that had operated under Korathi protection found themselves suddenly vulnerable to rivals who had spent years waiting for exactly this opportunity. The Thuralian Collective's gambling operations expanded into former syndicate territory, while the Xerian Brotherhood moved to secure the most profitable contraband routes with surgical precision. Yet none of these secondary predators dared challenge the new apex of the food chain. Marcus Kane had become the prison's unofficial arbitrator not through ambition or design, but simply because the alternative was chaos. During recreation periods, he found himself surrounded by delegations from various species seeking resolution to disputes that had previously been settled through Korathi enforcement. Inmates brought him territorial conflicts, resource allocation disagreements, and protection requests with the desperate hope that someone, anyone, could maintain the delicate balance that kept the prison from dissolving into total warfare. A group of Zephyrians, their crystalline exoskeletons clicking nervously, approached him during the afternoon rest cycle with a problem that exemplified the new reality. "Human Kane," their spokesman chittered through his translator, "the Thuralian raiders have claimed our meditation chambers. They demand tribute for access to facilities that have been ours for 7 standard cycles." Marcus looked up from the technical manual he'd been reading, a detailed analysis of prison life support systems that had appeared on his sleeping platform courtesy of an anonymous admirer. "Have you tried talking to them directly?" The Zephyrian's compound eyes reflected prismatic frustration. "They respond only to displays of force. Our species lacks the biological capacity for physical intimidation." "Then tell them I said to give you back your chambers." Marcus returned to his reading with the casual indifference of someone discussing weather patterns. "If they have a problem with that, they know where to find me." The simplicity of the solution, and its guaranteed effectiveness, spoke volumes about how fundamentally the prison's social dynamics had changed. Word of Marcus's arbitration spread through the communication networks with viral efficiency, and within hours, the Thuralians had quietly vacated the disputed territory without so much as a formal protest. But it wasn't just the inmates whose behavior had shifted. Prison administrators found themselves dealing with unprecedented levels of cooperation and reduced violence. Guard rotations that had previously required full tactical gear could now be conducted with standard equipment. The medical wing, traditionally overcrowded with assault victims, reported a 70% reduction in serious injuries. Even the automated defense systems registered lower threat levels as the prison's ambient aggression decreased to manageable parameters. The consortium officials monitoring the situation from their orbital command station watched these developments with a mixture of fascination and calculation. Someone with Marcus Kane's capabilities. Someone who could single-handedly neutralize the galaxy's most notorious prison gang and then impose order through sheer reputation, represented a resource too valuable to waste on incarceration. Classified communications began flowing between various government agencies, military commands, and intelligence services. The charges against Kane were being quietly reviewed by legal teams who suddenly discovered procedural irregularities and evidentiary gaps that had been overlooked during the initial prosecution. His case file was flagged for priority consideration by judicial review boards that had never before shown interest in individual prisoner appeals. In the methane-filled environment of his adjacent cell, Creek observed these machinations with the patient wisdom of a species that measured time in geological epochs. "Human Marcus," he gurgled during their evening conversation, "the administrators speak of releasing you from this facility. What intentions guide your future actions?" Marcus paused in his calisthenics routine, considering the question with the same analytical approach he applied to everything else. Through the transparent barriers of their cells, he could see other inmates conducting their daily activities with a level of peaceful coexistence that would have been impossible under the previous regime. "Find whoever really destroyed that supply depot," he said finally, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had already calculated every possible variable. "Clear my name. Maybe visit home for a while, assuming Hades 7 hasn't been completely strip-mined by now. And beyond that?" Marcus resumed his exercise routine, his movements flowing like water over stone as he transitioned between combat forms developed on a world that killed the unprepared without mercy or hesitation. "The galaxy's a big place, Creek. Full of predators who think strength means preying on those too weak to fight back. Maybe it's time someone reminded them that there's always something higher on the food chain." The translation algorithms couldn't convey the satisfaction that pulsed through Creek's bioluminescent communication organs, but Marcus understood the sentiment perfectly. Justice, it seemed, wore many faces throughout the galaxy, but sometimes it wore the face of someone who had learned to survive in hell and chose to use that knowledge in service of something greater than mere survival. Outside the station's viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small drama that had played out within the metal corridors of humanity's making. But on Station Kepler 442b, something fundamental had shifted in the balance between predator and prey, between strength and justice, between the way things were and the way they could be. The end.